Hello friends, I'm Beldon Huang. Welcome back to my channel. Here, the same reason as I did for Dan Gilbert's TED Talk, I think this talk, called The Paradox of Choice, effectively elaborates Gilbert's points on choices and how that affects our happiness, which made me decide to do this TED Talk with you guys. And before I introduce you guys to this talk, please remember to turn on your notifications and subscribe to my channel. Here we go. So to begin with, Schwartz stated the official dogma of industrial Western societies claims that the more choices individuals have, the more freedom they will have, and the more welfare they will have. And it appears that nobody seems to really question this. Nowadays, it is almost impossible to buy something at a store which doesn't oversell you. For instance, supermarkets with various salad dressings and stereo stores that sell more than 6 million sets of stereo systems, as said by Schwartz. While beyond material goods, the same could also be seen through ways of communication between public services and individuals, just like healthcare, as doctors would no longer instruct people what to do, but merely provide choices like you can do A with these advantages and disadvantages, or B with these advantages or disadvantages, or even more, without taking the patient's ability to make suitable choices into account in order to shift the responsibility to the public. Not to mention, more than that, our identities and marriages have become optional too. In comparison to the good old days, there was only one question to ask about marriage, and it is who with. Whereas people these days are worried about when to get married, who to get married with, should I apply for a job before marriage or not, etc. And because of all these questions, all of the questions we have waiting for us to answer, we become so preoccupied by them. Consequently, this restrains us from fully enjoying and engaging in the events that we are experiencing at the moment, despite their importance, namely going to our child's football game, as which Schwartz mentioned as an example. It does not matter where we go, where we are, he says. Life is all about making choices, which are good. However, there are a few drawbacks to it. Firstly, instead of liberation, choice creates paralysis. The more options people have, the more paralyzed we're going to be. Hence, as a result, we will end up with nothing because we didn't choose anything, as can be seen through the case of voluntary retirement plan options. That is, Schwartz demonstrated when there was a 10% increase in retirement options, participation rates dropped by 2%. Further, even if we overcome the paralysis and make our decision, we still won't be necessarily pleased with our results compared to when we had less choices. To which Schwartz suggests it is simply due to our expectations, meaning when the result of the choice we make is not as good as what we expected, it is inevitably easy for us to think that out of all of the choices out there, we could have made a better decision, even if our result is already quite good. That the reason being that when we are offered a range of choices, we will think that one of them should be perfect, in comparison to when we only have a few or no choice at all. Thus here, Schwartz argues the secret to happiness is to lower our expectations. However, needless to say, we will certainly feel unsatisfied when we are only offered one or no option. And we will think that it's not our fault, but the world's fault, and the world is responsible for this. In contrast, When we are offered a large number of options, we blame and feel ashamed of ourselves. And with regard to which, Schwartz stated, is the leading cause of clinical depression and suicide, all owing to the disappointment and self blame. Thus, it can be said that it is always better to have some choices, but simultaneously, nonetheless, we have to bear in mind that more choice does not indicate more welfare and freedom, applying to particularly affluent and developed societies. Therefore, Schwartz mentioned it would be much more beneficial if we get rid of some of our choices and give them to developing nations. Not only would their lives be better, but we are also able to live happier. Lastly, Schwartz showed a comic strip illustrating a fish in a fishbowl that says, "You can be anything you want to be, no limits." Sounds very foolish, but smart. Despite that, the fishbowl illustrated is certainly too small for us and a fish, albeit everyone needs a metaphoric fishbowl, so as to limit the number of choices that are given to us and to prevent the paralysis and dissatisfaction that follows, alongside what he calls a recipe of misery and disaster. To be or not to be? That is the question, Hamlet says. Indeed, just like Hamlet, we are making decisions every single day. From should I wake up or sleep another 5 minutes when we wake up to I wonder which underwear I should wear for today. Particularly in today's world, in contrast with our grandparents' times, we are taking much more matters into our own hands, giving us a wider range of choices. Albeit simultaneously, there are still areas that we do not have complete control over. That is, to be more specific, though in today's world we do have control over a lot of things, which gives us a wider range of options, but what we aren't aware of is the number of decisions we have to make resulting from the choices we have. Nevertheless, the same applies for the weather and the stock market. Perhaps we are not able to control the choices we have to make necessarily. However, we do have control over our mindset when we are making decisions. Hence, Schwartz argues decrease number of options we have, as increasing it will only paralyze and disappoint us, since the freedom to choose is taken away from us. Furthermore, opposing the norm of happiness in most societies, I also agree with Schwartz that not only by increasing our choices will we lose, not gain, happiness, but also freedom. Take law as an example. If some were to claim that freedom is unlimited wants and unlimited resources, in other words, choices, there would be no reason why law should ever exist. Nonetheless, I believe everything in life needs a limit, and we can only gain freedom by having the choice to choose what we can do within the realms of what we're allowed to do, which is practically demonstrated by our legislative system. If not, with the absence of law, our world would be in total chaos, because people may then believe that they have the right to say, do, and act anything they want concurrently, as people feel overwhelmingly paralyzed over the significant number of decisions they have to make. Thus, I would argue it is only through a suitable, adequate amount of restriction can we feel freedom. Otherwise, without it, when we are suffering from paralysis, as Schwartz mentioned, self-blame, it is as if we have no choice at all. And when there is no choice, there's no freedom. On top of that, I think one of the worst parts of paralysis, beyond what Schwartz argues, depression and self-blame, is the fearful, uncertain feeling before we feel depressed and regretful. worrying whether we have made the right decision even before the results are shown. Hence, I would like to suggest that, such like the argument I delivered in my previous video, we will have to create some certainty for ourselves. And that is by fully trusting, loving, and believing in our choices once we have selected them and use them to the best of our ability. Essentially, being resourceful, beyond restricting down our choices. This can be applied on, for instance, university or job choices, marriages, etc. But of course, all the things that we are concerned about. In addition to how to decrease the number of choices, or at the very least the feeling of paralysis, which Schwartz didn't talk about, besides the notion of creating a barrier, I firmly believe that knowing what we want can be extremely beneficial for our decision making, as it should also be taken into account before we make every decision. Because knowing what we want, or even better, knowing what we want precisely, enable us to move on to the next step, which is breaking it down to smaller and smaller areas. While this method can be used notwithstanding when we don't know what we want, and hence help us find what we want exactly. As we narrow down a broad and vague idea, desire, or goal into something that is much more specific, precise, and focused. Subsequently, we do not have to worry about the paralysis that follows the choices and number of choices we will have to consider. And therefore, we will be even more certain and confident in our decision. Overall, I believe, despite the fact that we cannot escape decision making occurring on a day-to-day basis, we can, in the best of our ability, control how we make our decisions, which is by having a vague idea of what we want at first and narrowing it down to even more and more specific goals, just like a funnel. Simultaneously, as we're doing this, we are decreasing the number of choices we have to make and be more certain and convinced in our choice. And through this, we will have freedom as well as a more balanced and sustainable society. Thank you guys so much for listening to my speech. I hope you guys like it or even are enlightened in some way, because I feel that what I have said is truly important, and it is arguably a piece of knowledge that once we know it, we can use for the rest of our lives. So please smash that like button and comment and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.